Hey everyone, welcome to session 164 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I'm thrilled to be joined today by Dr. Kelsey Ruppel. She is the Senior Consultant and Director of Operations at FTF Behavioral Consulting. And in this episode, we talked a lot about the BALANCE program, and that's the intervention that she and others pioneered during her graduate work, and it is mainly a prevention program, or perhaps better stated, an intervention to address emerging challenging behaviors with individuals with autism. So we spend a good chunk of the podcast, again, talking about that. We also kind of compare and contrast that with the Preschool Life Skills curriculum, and which is another prevention program. We cover some other contemporary topics in behavior analysis as well, including things like some pro tips for remote consultation, because that's kind of what they're doing a lot these days at FTF, especially given the resurgence of the COVID-19 virus. We talk a lot about how to optimize your skills-based treatment process and what's meant by the term gray reinforcement. You're going to have to listen through to, I think we get to that towards the end of the podcast. It's an interesting concept. And so, in short, I think this interview offers a lot of practical tips for everyday BCBAs, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. We have a lot of links at the show notes, so we mentioned a bunch of different things, and so if you go to behavioralobservations.com and look for session 164, I've tried to link as many resources as possible. So, and as always, these show notes can be emailed directly to you as well. So if you go to behavioralobservations.com, there'll be one of those pop-up windows that ask you to put in your email address. And if you want to do that, what will happen is that shortly after I publish a podcast, I will send these show notes directly to your email inbox. You don't even have to go to the website to check them out. And I promise I don't spam or repurpose or resell the email list or anything like that. So, and I only send a few emails a month, so it's not like getting emails from, say, like Target or Home Depot or other places that like to send you emails every single day. So, all right, enough about the email list. But before we get to the show, I want to let you know that we are brought to you by the 2021 Stone Soup Conference. And it's a conference that Kelsey will be speaking at, and she does actually preview some of what she'll talk about there. It's an amazing event, and it's very, very reasonably priced. It's got tons of great speakers. Most of them have been on the show, so I'm a little bit biased. But again, if you want to learn more about the Stone Soup Conference, the easiest way to get the link is to just go to the show notes for this episode. And while it's already a very reasonable price, if you use the promo code podcast, you'll save even more at registration. We're also brought to you by the 2021 New Hampshire ABA Conference. And again, Dr. Kelsey is the keynote speaker at this event. Are you sensing a theme here? I am. Anyway, she'll be doing the morning keynote at the New Hampshire ABA Conference. It's happening on September 11th, 2021. So if you are in the New England area, take the short drive to beautiful Concord, New Hampshire. But if you're not in our region, this event will be available virtually. So this year's program features both a clinical and business track. And if you're there on site, it'll also include a free lunch and an afternoon ice cream social. Obviously, if you're attending virtually, you'll have to get lunch on your own. But there'll be great talks not only from Kelsey, but also from Polly Gavoni, Byron Wine, Peter Gerhardt, Antonio Harrison, and much more. For details, go to newhampshireaba.net. That's nhaba.net. And then click the conference tab for details. Again, that's nhaba.net. And they have generously supplied listeners with a promotional code. So if you want to save a little money at checkout, use the offer code MATT2021. And then last but not least, if you like what you hear on the Behavioral Observations podcast, you can support the show by either joining the Patreon group, which provides numerous benefits such as ad-free podcasts, members-only events, discounts on cool stuff, and more, or by considering Behavioral Observations for your continuing ed needs. That's right. We have lots of podcasts that we have repurposed for continuing education. So if you go to behavioralobservations.com and click on Get CEUs, you'll find all that information there. Okay, so I think that does it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get to this fun conversation with Dr. Kelsey Ruppel.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Kelsey Ruppel, thanks for joining me on the Behavioral Observations Podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. How are you?
Good. I think that was maybe the fifth time we did that introduction. I think we finally got it.
Fifth time's the charm.
That's right. Practice makes perfect, right? So there's just additional evidence for repetition and generating fluency. So all kidding aside, again, thanks so much for joining me today. We've got a lot to talk about here. I am excited to learn about the Balance Program, what's going on at FTF, and what you're going to be talking about at the Stone Soup Conference, and all sorts of other things. But first, let's get started like we always do. I want to hear about how you discovered ABA in the first place and what made you decide to pursue it as a career. What made you say, I want to do this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think my story echoes so many where I stumbled upon ABA a bit. I was offered a job right out of college at a specialized school as an instructional assistant. And so I thought I'd give it a shot, and I just ended up loving it. I remember being, maybe a week into the job and just thinking, this is it. This is what I want to do. This is a perfect fit.
Were you a psych major or a special ed major? What was how did you find this job, I guess, as an undergraduate?
Yeah, no, I wasn't actually. I was an international relations major, and what I thought I wanted to do was work for the State Department and work in diplomacy. But as my college career sort of evolved, I started realizing maybe this isn't quite what I want to do. I'd always really enjoyed working with kids and had a lot of sort of general experience working with kids. So I was moving into thinking, I think education is more what I want to explore. But at the time I graduated, I was still not quite sure.
I see. And so was this job opportunity just like something you saw in an advertisement, or was there a friend refer you to it? I'm just like I said, I'm always fascinated how people kind of connect the dots, especially coming from a non, human service type of a background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I saw, I think it was through my career center. I got connected to this job. It was at a school in the Washington, D.C. area where I went to undergrad. And so I thought I would check it out. I was kind of checking out a lot of different types of jobs, and I was really impressed when I visited the school with the, individual student attention. They were offering to put me through what today would be sort of like RBT level training. And so I thought, I'll do it. I'll see how it goes. And I just ended up adoring it and stayed at the school and went back and got my master's in special ed while I was there, and then got my BCBA while I was there. And I was there actually for 10 years, and I only left to go work for Greg Hanley at Western New England.
I see. And so how did that relationship, or how did you become aware of that work, and what made you want to go from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Massachusetts?
Mm-hmm. Probably circa 2014, when the paper came out. The paper. I was reading that. I was seeing Greg present, and over the next couple of years, I started doing some ISCAs in the setting that I was working in, and saw how powerful that technology was, and how powerful a skill-based treatment was. And I actually am from Massachusetts originally. Mm-hmm. And so that, that helps in any
I
big
see.
move decision. But I ended up deciding, this skill-based treatment is one of the most powerful things that I have used. And what I want to do is help advance our understanding of this process. And so Greg was, at Western New England at that time, and you couldn't just go work for him. You had to be a PhD student. So I thought, okay, I will apply to be a PhD student. And I was accepted, and that's sort of how I got to where I am now.
Very cool. So speaking of where you are now, so you're, can you tell us about, I guess let's just follow the string of your kind of career arc. So you went and studied at Western New England. What specific, before we get to what you're doing, after grad school, what specifically did you do your dissertation? It was, I assume it was something in the area of practical functional assessment, skills-based treatment, et cetera. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you studied there and what you pursued in your doctoral studies?
Yeah. At Western New England, we had the Life Skills Clinic. So it was our PFA SBT clinic. And I served as the associate director there. And so I did a lot of the, helping to coordinate the studies that we were doing, recruiting participants, screening participants. And I also ran PFA and SBT with a number of clients as part of my colleagues' projects. My colleague Robin Landa, for example, has a study on whether you should prompt a functional communication response immediately following problem behavior. And I worked with her on that one. And Christy Warner's study on progressive extinction analysis, and Ditu Rajuraman's studies on the ISCA. And so it was an amazing opportunity to all work together and also serve clients in that context. My dissertation was on the balance program. And so I was really fortunate to be able to do PFA and SBT with kids with existing severe problem behavior, but also to shift gears a little bit and develop the balance program with Greg as my dissertation project.
Wow, what an opportunity! And what it's funny. I interviewed one of my friends from graduate school, and there was a bunch of us at Auburn at one particular time, and it was like. It was one of those things that, like lightning only striking once. And I can imagine that I guess, cohort of individuals that you just referenced, as well as, I'm sure there are many other members of that group.
There are. Mm-hmm.
What an amazing time to be a graduate student. So that had to be just really exciting, especially as this technology was being developed, and especially in the context of it being kind of unorthodox relative to other assessment and treatment approaches, and so on and so forth. So I don't know, it just kind of occurred to me to acknowledge that. It must have just been, again, just an amazing time to be a student in that environment.
So incredibly exciting. And, I guess I could go on and on, but what we did there has directly shaped what I'm continuing to do at FTF Behavioral Consulting with Greg. We've continued to refine these processes as we've done them in the research context and also in clinical and consultative settings. And so certainly I consult a lot on PFA and SBT. But I also am able to draw on other things. I worked with Holly Gover on her food selectivity protocol while I was there, with Jessica Slayton on assessing and treating interfering stereotypy. So just a wealth of opportunities.
Amazing. So you're at FTF right now. And so tell us a little bit about what your role is with FTF Behavioral Consulting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was really just fortunate at about the time that I was getting ready to graduate from Western New England. Greg decided to pivot and start FTF Behavioral Consulting. And, we had worked well together. And so we decided to keep this going. And as a new company, we all wear a lot of hats. And So, some operational things, but mostly clinical and consulting. So most of what I get to do is work with organizations, school districts, ABA companies, other types of organizations to train and consult on the practical functional assessment and skill-based treatment. I also do training and consultation on the balance program and on this idea of a universal protocol, which is something that's a little bit newer, or at least in a named way, it's a little bit newer for our group. But this is an idea that, in a really universal sense, the way an organization or a district interacts with all clients, the way they train staff to interact with clients can be based on these missions, these priorities that shape the PFA and SBT process of safety, dignity, rapport building, and can be really focused on establishing trust and following a client's lead and minimizing the use of extinction and being super responsive to client communication attempts and also to problem behavior.
I see. I want to dig more into that, but I just kind of have a more nosy question about FTF more generally. Sure. Before we get to that. I remember chatting with Greg when he originally formed FTF, and pre-pandemic, the mission was a lot of international work. Mm-hmm. Did you have an opportunity to consult internationally, and if so, what were your experiences doing that in terms of not only just the cultural differences, et cetera, but maybe other things that might get lost in translation, either literally or figuratively, and perhaps a second question related to that might be, given that things are starting to, or at least hopefully returning to somewhat normal, do you envision doing more of that international outreach going forward?
Yeah, we've been super fortunate to be able to continue our national and international work during the pandemic. It looks different, as everyone's work does. But, before the pandemic, we're spending a lot of time traveling to people's locations. And there are some things to be said about that, being face-to-face with people, making people feel really supported. However, the pandemic, forced us to pivot to doing things remote. And so our process now is completely remote. And to be honest, it's just as good, if not better. What we do, we had been going to people's locations, doing a training on site, coaching their folks to implement. Usually the front end assessment, maybe get a little started with treatment, and then we would do follow-up meetings over the next several months to talk about treatment progress and sort of shape the treatment process. But once the pandemic started, what we started doing was having people do the front end training, usually as an on-demand course, which is nice because it's self-paced and mastery-based, which are lectures in person or not. And once they finished that, then we would get on a Zoom call and we would spend a lot of time designing the ISCA together, designing the skill-based treatment for particular clients. And then we would Zoom in and join via Zoom as those folks implemented their ISCA. So we'd have the implementer wearing a little Bluetooth earpiece. We would be talking directly to them as they did the ISCA and coaching them and helping them through it, get started a little bit with functional communication training. And then we would move into that pattern again of meeting, usually weekly, to review some video and talk about how the treatment process is going. Sometimes we'll continue to do some live coaching to help people shape skills throughout the treatment process. And it's some of the things I love about it is that it's efficient. It allows us to work with more people because we're not spending whole days on planes. It's also, unobtrusive. It versus us, a stranger, being in a room with a client and an implementer. We're just in the implementer's ear, and we can just say, reinforce that, and that's it. And it really stays more of an interaction between the implementer and the client, which is nice. So that was a very long-winded way of saying that I think in some ways the way that we've been forced to pivot because of the pandemic, I think will continue to be the way that we deliver services in the future, and will allow us to reach folks in all areas of the world, because it won't be a matter of us trying to figure out how we're going to get there and how we're going to fund us getting there.
Understood. Yeah, that's makes all the sense in the world. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I know I'm going to get emails asking me this question. Is there a particular, and I know technology is always evolving, so maybe someone listening to this a year from now or 2 years from now, the answer might be different. So I'm not going to hold you to anything, but with regard to the Bluetooth earpiece, and I'm sorry to get so granular about this stuff, but again, like people will ask, which I completely respect. Is there a particular brand or device or something that you've seen work really well? Or are you guys able to kind of roll with just about anything in that category of technology or hardware, I suppose?
Yeah, there isn't a particular one. We usually just use whatever people have. And my tips on that are just to, test it out ahead of time, make sure the range is good if you have it connected to a computer or a phone that's on the call in the room that you can move around as much as you think you're going to, and it stays connected. And then just being as small and discreet as possible is good. We want it to not seem like the implementer is distracted. We want them to be fully available to the learner. So little, tiny, and maybe just one.
I see. Got it. That's helpful. I don't. So if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't want people to look like we look like now with our
exactly
Starbucks drive-through rigs on our heads, and so very good, very good. Okay, so let's turn to the balance program, and I'd like to get into more about these universal protocols and. I have a general familiarity with the balance program. I actually started the course. I haven't finished it yet. That you and Greg did, the on-demand course at FTF. So I know a little bit about it. I know it's perhaps maybe a predecessor, or let me throw this at you and see if my understanding is correct. But I guess general sense is that the preschool life skills might have been a predecessor to the balance program, and for those who are unfamiliar with it, the preschool life skills is I think it's a series of like 13 or 14 skills that are taught universally in a childcare setting, and the idea behind it is that you teach the skills that will prevent the need for problem behavior. And I'm maybe using terms a little bit loosely, but you're teaching kids how to request assistance, how to follow simple instructions, how to some sharing skills, some interaction skills, empathy skills, and things along those lines. It's more hierarchical, if you will. And the research that's out there on that suggests that it's broadly speaking helpful in many ways. It's a program that I've recommended in my own work, certainly. So if my characterization is correct, what is similar and what is different about the Preschool Life Skills program and the Balance program?
Yeah, great. Yes, you're exactly right that the Balance program, it grew out of Preschool Life Skills and out of our PFA-SBT work, but the mission of it is preventative, like Preschool Life Skills. So the idea is that how can we get in there before problem behavior escalates, before it worsens, to prevent it. And so some of the differences are in who is implementing where and kind of in what context. The Preschool Life Skills program, as you mentioned, it's designed to be a class-wide program, and then you can do it in a tiered fashion. So you can go to small group implementation and then one-to-one implementation, and that's been done. the balance program is a version that we intended to be implemented by parents or family members one-to-one with their child, young child with autism, in the home with intermittent support from a BCBA. So one thought we had with this is that wait lists for comprehensive services are super long. Families report not knowing what to do between the time they receive a diagnosis and getting off that wait list. And so our thought was, okay, we have evidence from Preschool Life Skills and from SkillBased Treatment that these skills can be really useful in terms of preventing and intervening on problem behavior. How could we get these skills into the hands of families ASAP? So we, in our initial study, the way that we set it up is we created this manual. It's a manualized curriculum. It is flexible and individualizable, but we had the BCBA do 2 one-hour visits with a family per week. And in between those visits, we asked the parent to practice the skills with the child. We'd come back, we'd check on how the skills look, and we'd either keep practicing or we'd introduce a new lesson and get the family started practicing that lesson. So they would go through this series of lessons with the parent doing a lot of the teaching in the home setting, with us just acting as coaches, support people. Thinking that, if professionals are not able to take on another comprehensive client, they might be able to take on a client for 2 one-hour visits a week. And companies might be able to be providing this service to families who are on their wait list and get parents something they can be working on with their kids during this wait list time, and get in there and be preventing problem behavior from worsening during that time.
I see. And what is available out there right now in terms of the empirical support for this approach?
Yeah, great question. So it's important to start by saying that none of the lessons, none of the skills we taught in it are unique to the balance program. They all come from somewhere. And you can take a look at our paper, which recently came out in Behavior Analysis and Practice, to see the references associated with each of the skills that we teach. The skills being generally, first, we promote child-led play. Then we teach children to respond to name calls. We teach some functional communication. We teach tolerance for no, and we teach cooperation. And then we take those skills and we extend them, we generalize them. So all of that probably sounds familiar because other people have done it. What we did is we just took these skills, packaged them together, put them into this manual, and set it up in a way that we thought would be doable and effective for families to do in the home. And so, it draws on all of that research, but then we did our initial evaluation with 4 families participating in this balance program at the dosage that I was talking about. And what we saw in that single subject design was that for all of the participants, problem behavior decreased, skills increased, and we saw the development of balance. The reason we call it the balance program is we saw the development of balance between child-led activity and adult-led activity. And what we were often seeing at the start was that the parent-child interactions would be really kind of unbalanced. It would be all child-led or potentially all adult-led. And there are critical learning opportunities in each of those types of interactions, child-led and adult-led. And so we wanted to bring it more into balance. There's some time where the parent's following the child's lead. There's some time where the child is cooperating with learning activities. And so we saw the development of greater balance in parent-child interactions. We also saw parents acquire some teaching, prompting, and shaping skills during this program as well. So we're happy with those outcomes. We also used a more global measure, the aberrant behavior checklist, to look at more general effects on child behavior, and we saw some neat effects there too. And so we were happy with the outcomes that we saw in that study, but we're far from the end. Not that there is an end, but our second study of the Balance program is in progress right now. My colleague Cara LaCroix is the first author on that. And what we're doing there is we're implementing Balance again. We're doing it all via telehealth. And we are also using a waitlist control group so that we can take a look at what happens with child behavior for those learners who are in the control group over time. They will then, of course, receive treatment too, but that's modeled on the paper by Lazinski and Hanley, the Preschool Life Skills one that had that group design where what they found was that problem behavior worsened among children in the control group compared with children in the treatment group, the PLS group. Those kiddos, they saw elimination of problem behavior in the evocative context, and that they were viewing as evidence for the preventive effects, it being difficult to assert that prevention has happened in a single subject design. And so we do need to move into this group design, we think, in order to show more evidence that we're actually getting prevention as opposed to early problem behavior decreasing or eliminating, which is really what we showed in this first study.
Hey everyone, just want to take a quick break here and remind you that if you're liking what you're hearing, Dr. Ruppel will be giving the keynote address, the morning keynote at the New Hampshire ABA conference coming up on September 11th, 2021. It'll be held in beautiful downtown Concord, New Hampshire. And if you're not local to the region, that's okay. It's available virtually as well. So go to nhaba.net and use the offer code MAT2021 when you check out, and you can save a little bit on your registration. There's lots of great speakers there. There's even a free lunch and an ice cream social to boot. Of course, not for folks who are attending virtually. You'll have to get your own lunch and ice cream. So perhaps that incentivizes you to come visit with us in Concord. I hope to see you there. All right, let's get back to the interview. I'm glad you brought up the groups design versus the single subject design. What did you have to? What other training or resources or supports did you have? Let me ask the question differently. I suppose. Did you have a background in this stuff going into this, and if not, what was the support you sought out to undertake this kind of between subjects, if you will, approach? Because it's obviously not native to our behavior analytic DNA, I suppose, in some respects. So I'm curious to hear how that, doing a groups design is, for me would be, I'm not a researcher regardless. So, but that would be further afield than contemplating something from a within subjects context.
Yeah. I'm far from an expert. However, I am so grateful for the education that I got at Western New England University. The faculty there is really well-rounded, clearly experts in single subject designs. However, the faculty has expertise in all kinds of research methods. And so through my coursework there, I learned some really important things. Our very first course that we took, at least at that time in the doctoral program, was taught by Greg. And it was about research designs. And we talked not only about single subject, but also about group designs. This is something that he's knowledgeable about. And so, he certainly is critical to us designing these studies well.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right, cool. That was, again, it's just something's just occurred to me to ask on the spot there, but it's interesting when there's a lot of, whether you're talking about like, group sizes, effect sizes, power, and all those things. And, I just have these kind of, I attended a general psych grad program that had a lot of that stuff too. And I was just like, I just need to get through this to get to the single subject class, so that would be incredibly daunting for me. So kudos to you and the team for taking the extra step to use an appropriate evaluative tool for the experimental question. All right. So you mentioned the universal protocols earlier in the conversation. I want to come back to that. I guess generally, I'd like to give you an opportunity to expand more about that. It sounds to me when you're kind of briefly described it earlier that it reminded me of like a PBIS type of intervention in a school setting where you teach everyone safety, respect, responsibility, or some such thing. Is it kind of inspired by that, or if not, how is it different? And more generally, again, I'd like to just give you an opportunity to go a little bit deeper on what you guys are doing with regard to these universal protocols.
Yeah, it is. You're exactly right that as the name implies, it's meant to be something delivered universally to all of the clients or students served by a particular organization. And one of the inspirations for this was, we'll work with organizations, and we'll be talking, when we're talking about PFA and SBT, we're talking so much about values. We're talking about the values of safety, dignity, and rapport building. We're talking about how we don't need escalations to understand. We don't need escalations for learning to happen. We're trying to get people more comfortable with gentle shaping processes, reinforcing problem behavior, living to teach another trial, as Greg says, and always starting from a place of joy, from happy, relaxed, and engaged, and going from there. And as we're talking to people about those values, what people said to us over and over is, this is amazing and it's transforming the way that we work with these particular learners. But really, we want that to be the starting point for all of our clients. We want all of our staff to understand that those are the values. We want all of our staff to have a repertoire for interacting with clients in this way. Mm-hmm. And not every client will necessarily need a PFA or skill-based treatment, but we want every client to come in and to have the priorities be developing trusting relationships with staff. We don't want extinction to necessarily be our go-to. Right. Protocol. And so we want a way to refocus. And so the universal protocol is largely that, we have a set of strategies that we suggest, but we also work with organizations to make it fit for them. But the ideas are that we're looking for a way for mission number one when any client walks through the door. Mission number one for staff is to build rapport, build trust with that client. And we have specific strategies for how to do that, to follow the client's lead and to be really responsive to any communication attempts and also to any problem behavior, and just try to reinforce it, to turn it off right away, and teach clients that we will be super responsive and that there is no need to escalate because we see and hear you. And so we're starting from that place. We're trying to establish joy. We're trying to eliminate student and staff injury. We're trying to eliminate the need for restrictive procedures. And from that foundation, then there are directions we can go. Once you've got that foundation of interaction in place, sort of the next step is to thoughtfully present the sorts of assessment or learning activities that you would, whatever your curriculum or your assessment is, present that. We work with people to put to put any EO, present any demand in a thoughtful way. But we just present those demands and we see how does this go. And for some learners, for many learners, if we've established this baseline relationship of trust and rapport, we see cooperation and we're mostly good. We can just go forth and do our VB map, do our ABLES, do our peak, do whatever it is that we do. And this is how we interact with clients. But we do work too. It's not whatever the client wants all day long.
Sure.
However, there may also be clients who, when we try to thoughtfully put in place these activities, we do see some problem behavior. And so for those clients, it's a question of frequency and severity. And if it's just a little bit, maybe an expedited version of skill-based treatment could be done. Maybe we don't need to do the entire process, but maybe we get all of the staff knowing when and how to prompt an FCR. We reinforce that a bit, and then we start shaping chains of cooperation with the tasks using intermittent unpredictable reinforcement, synthesized reinforcement context, and that's where we go. But for the learners who are engaging in the most severe problem behavior, that's when probably we do a full practical functional assessment and a full skill-based treatment. And for the learners who are the most complex, perhaps that's it's done by the BCBA and then extended to the rest of the team. Or perhaps there's a team within the organization that sort of focuses and is highly trained on these processes. So we start from universal protocol, and then we can go in these sort of three directions based on what the individual client needs.
Fascinating. What types of settings are reaching out to you folks for this type of training? And I don't want you to betray any confidentiality, of course, or anything like that. But can you talk just more broadly, like who is the customer for these types of, I guess, general approaches? General might sound a little less nuanced or sophisticated, but I think these universal procedures, I suppose.
We've people have been interested across all the types of organizations we work with. So specialized schools, certainly public schools, ABA companies, in-home clinic-based residential programs, really all of the above. And it is, it's nice because it's so flexible. It's not specific to a particular type of service setting. It's just here are the ways that we do and don't interact with clients to bring the joy, to prevent escalation of problem behavior, to establish rapport, and to keep everyone safe, bottom line.
Very good. All right. I want to pivot a little bit. You have a speaking engagement coming up at the Stone Soup Conference in October, and I want to give the audience have you given the audience a little bit of a preview of what you're going to talk about? Now, just to be perfectly transparent, the Stone Soup Conference is sponsoring the podcast for several episodes. So just, for whoever's interested in this sort of thing, I just want to disclose that. Mm-hmm. And as such, I'm going to also ask you not to give it all away either. I want folks to get an idea of what you're talking about, and very unashamedly, I want folks to go register for the conference. And I'll have links in the show notes about how to do just that. So can you give us a little preview of your Stone Soup 2021 talk?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my talk is going to be based on some work that I started when I was at Western New England, and it's another sort of version of PFA and SBT that I'm really passionate about. So the sort of general skill-based treatment that you hopefully know and love is largely focused on socially mediated problem behavior. That's not exclusively the case, but oftentimes we are talking about things like escaping non-preferred work to do as the child wants to do with the sort of attention they want. They may also be escaping to some stereotypy. It's not that may be automatically reinforced. It's not necessarily completely socially mediated, but there's a lot of social mediation going on there. And so the question remains, what do we do when it seems like automatic reinforcement is a really central part of what's happening? And so we have some tweaks to the process that we use when that's the case. And there's sort of kind of two general categories that we can look at. We can look at behavior that's a problem because, for example, it's interfering with skill acquisition, but it's not dangerous. So things like stereotypy that might be automatically reinforced. It's interfering with the student's ability to learn, but it's not that they can never do it. It's just in certain contexts, maybe it would be helpful to be able to inhibit it. So we have a version of the skill-based treatment for that. And so part of what I'm going to talk about is that, and also talk about considerations with respect to whether and when and how you even want to intervene on stereotypy, which I think is a really important question.
Oh, yeah, I mean, such a timely topic too, for sure. And certainly one where there's varying perspectives on that. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about that for sure.
Yeah. And then the sort of other version is, okay, so there's that, and that's great. But what about when the behavior seems sensitive to automatic reinforcement and is dangerous? It's something that we can't allow. And so we also have a version of the process for that. And so I'm going to be talking about that as well.
All right, folks, this is the last commercial break of this episode, and I just wanted to remind you that if you're not familiar with it already, we have a Patreon group for the Behavioral Observations podcast, and there are a number of benefits that come depending on what tier you sign up for. We've got some stickers, some cool stickers. We've got, I think one of the more popular items or popular benefits, I should say, is the ad-free podcast feed. And that's basically what the name implies. And so you just get the episode itself. This particular episode went out with just the introductory music and went right to the interview. We even left some bloopers in of some of my, verbal struggles, if you will. We also do some Zoom hangouts. I like to bring former guests on periodically, and people can ask them questions directly. It's usually great fun. And there's a couple other things. There's discounts to various CE providers, both the Behavioral Observations CE store, and there are also discounts available for some of the resources we talked about here from FTF. So if you want to learn more about this, just head over to behavioralobservations.com and click on the Patreon tab at the top, and it'll give you all the information you need. Okay, let's get back to this interview with Kelsey. One of the things I like about the work that you guys do, when I say you guys, I'm talking about the whole FTF team, et cetera, is that you're never satisfied. You're always looking for better ways to do things and whatnot. So and so based on that, I would love to know what is new, if anything, in the world of skills-based treatment. Let's take it from the standpoint of, all right, we've done the interview, we've done the ISCA itself, we have an idea of what the synthesized reinforcers are. So talk a little bit about how the skills-based treatment, the intervention side of that, what's new in that world, how it's might have been evolved since, say, like the 10-hour course was published, and things like that.
Yeah, you're right. It is constantly evolving, and I hope that never changes as we do this. We are always learning things. So yeah, there are a few kind of new or recent emphases that I guess I'd like to talk about. The first is that one thing we've been focusing on a lot lately is how can we speed up the skill-based treatment process while remaining true to our values. We're never sacrificing safety, dignity, or rapport in the interests of speed. But we need to recognize that that there are 1,001 ways that you can get sidetracked in this process, because there are 1,001 ways or things that you could teach, and you could always shape up and perfect a particular skill more and more. And the trick is to not get sucked into doing that when it's not a priority for that particular learner. And so what we're trying to work on is really keeping our eyes on the prize. And at each step of the process, at functional communication, at tolerant response, at each of our little CABs, our little cooperation steps, focusing on that which is going to be most meaningful for that particular learner and their community, and not getting sidetracked doing all of the things that we could do. And so one thing we've been putting together is a set of tips and suggestions for how you can do that, how you might expedite the process, and things you might choose to focus on versus leave by the wayside in the interests of just getting to what matters as efficiently as possible. And sort of a related point to that is, the reason we have to do that is because there's so much to teach. And for some learners, it is quite a long shaping journey. And so we don't want to get sidetracked off to the side if it keeps us from getting down the road to where we need to be. Now, for some learners, you take that skill-based treatment workbook, you teach some CAB branches, you do some extension to new people, new places, just like in the 2014 paper, and you're in business. You're seeing generalization to untaught exemplars. You're kind of good. But for other learners, you're going to need to do a lot more explicit teaching before you start to see this generalization to untaught exemplars. And so another place that we've been focusing our work is on really putting together supports for people who are finding, okay, we've taught some CAB branches, but there's still a lot that we're needing to explicitly target with this learner in order to make this process practical for them all day and to really address their needs all day. And so that has led us to develop a second workbook. We call it the Generalization and Maintenance Workbook. And it may not be necessary for all learners, but it guides you through some thinking about, okay, we teach some CAB branches. If you're familiar with that term, that just means we teach cooperation with some specific activities. Then from there, what else do we need to teach so that this can be something that helps the learner all day? And an example of something that we need to explicitly teach for some learners is something that we call gray reinforcement.
I'm excited to hear about this because you mentioned that in our correspondence leading up to this. And that's new to me. So what is gray reinforcement?
Yeah, so gray reinforcement, we call it that because early on in the process, we really emphasize keeping things black and white, making it really clear to the learner when they're in reinforcement and when they're in EO, and making those super distinct. But we also recognize that that's not how life works. And at some point, the learner needs to be able to handle the reinforced things being a little more gray. And usually the key piece there is the reinforcement context being a little more gray. You can have some of the stuff you want, but not all of it. There might be some limits on it. And so we need to get to that place. And some learners need us to explicitly teach that skill. And so here's what we do. We typically will teach, we'll shape tolerance through what we call a CAB 6, which is just cooperation with a variety of instructions in a particular task. We'll get that looking really good with this nice, clear black and white reinforcement and EO. But then once we've got that, we'll start doing SBT within SBT. We'll start doing the process within the reinforcement context to teach the learner to handle less than ideal reinforcement context. So what it might look like is the learner does all of the things they're supposed to do in EO. They go back to reinforcement, and some of the time they get everything just the way they have been. But some of the time, maybe they go back to reinforcement, but something's missing, and we teach them to ask for it, and they get it. But then we say, no, sorry, can't have that one. They emit a tolerance response. We reinforce it. We give the thing. But then from there, even though it's the reinforcement interval, we say, this thing's just not available, or my attention's just not available, or whatever it is. Go pick something else. We teach them to initiate and do something else. And eventually the thing they wanted comes back. But we can shape this skill set to such a point where maybe some reinforcement intervals, the thing just isn't available. So if, for example, the learner has maxed out their screen time that day, just don't have screens on that reinforcement interval, or a caregiver is not always going to be available to give the full attention for the full reinforcement interval. We teach the learner to handle doing a lot of their preferred things, but not having the caregiver's full attention. All of those sorts of things that will make this more practical and realistic to actually be implementing across the day and across settings.
That is sounds like an Escher painting of some sorts of, or like holding a mirror up to a mirror. But yeah, that's right. Way cool. That is super cool. And what a very I guess sophisticated extension of the existing process. Look forward to hearing more about that. All right. Well, I think we're getting close to the time we have, Kelsey. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to mention anything else that about your work that you'd like to say that I haven't thought a chance to ask about, or wrap up with some advice for the newly minted BCBA, or perhaps sometimes BCBAs of all ages and experience levels.
Well, we have covered so much. I'm not sure there's anything else about my work that I want to say. This has been such a delight to be able to talk to you about these things that I care about so much. In terms of advice or things that I'm always thinking about, for me, probably one of the most important things that we can do as behavior analysts is really listen well to our clients and to the people we consult with, their families, teachers, other recipients. And I say that because, as you mentioned, Matt, what we do at FTF is so shaped by the feedback that we get and by our implementation experiences each time. And really all of our processes have been so largely shaped by things that clients and families have told us and what we've learned with them through the years. And so it's super important to us to keep listening and to allow those folks to continue to shape our processes. And so I'm always, when I'm talking with people, with recipients of the services, I'm always asking myself, am I listening to respond to this person, or am I listening to understand what this person is saying to me? And it's so important to me to be listening to understand, and it shapes how that conversation goes, and it shapes what I can take out of the conversation in terms of my relationship with that person, and also in terms of making our processes better. And so that, I guess, is my advice, to always be asking yourself that question right now in this moment. Am I listening to respond to this person? Am I listening so just until I have the opportunity to explain to them what I meant? Or am I listening to understand what they really mean, which usually means I have to ask more questions to understand why they're saying this and why this is important to them, and what I'm missing, what I'm not getting, that's leading them to say all of this.
That's incredibly helpful advice. I appreciate being so thoughtful with that. This especially in a field like ours, where where we hold a lot of knowledge in a very specific area, and speaking just for myself, sometimes I'm just excited to share that information, or if I have a potential solution in my head, to share that, and so on. Perhaps without listening fully. So great advice to end this really fun conversation with. So Dr. Kelsey Ruppel, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.